Original characters are a big thing in Star Wars' expanded media, especially since the novels, where they're written throughout series interacting with characters from the films. One of the more notable OC characters in the Star Wars novels was Corran Horn, a Corellian cop turned X-Wing pilot turned Jedi Knight, with author Michael Stackpole really embracing the guy throughout his run on Star Wars novels, writing deep lore for the character and creating one of Luke's closest allies in the New Jedi Order throughout the series. I, Jedi was said to be Michael Stackpole's favorite Star Wars novel of the 8 he would write in the series during his time in the universe, the book telling the Jedi origin of Corran Horn. It takes place concurrently with Kevin J. Anderson's Jedi Academy trilogy from 1994, dropping 4 years later in 1998. This book came out exactly 1 week before I was born, actually. I don't know, fun fact, I guess. Not super relevant to the development, though. But regardless, one notable retcon is Corran was added to the reincarnation of Exar Kun, the Sith spirit they fight in the trilogy, despite not being there in the Jedi Academy novel, or I guess canonically just not mentioned. Despite common belief, the novels of the extended universe had a pretty tight continuity. That was a little less true about the comics, but regardless, it was worth noting this is one of the few quote-unquote major retcons in the history of the extended universe. Corran Horn is a man with many skills in the galaxy, hailing from Corellia, the same planet as Han Solo, where he grew up to be a member of the Corellian security force before leaving the planet and joining elite X-Wing group Rogue Squadron. Though in 11 ABY, after the kidnapping of his wife Mirax while he was on a mission, Corran heads out to find her. This is during some drama about whether or not they wanted kids, eventually stumbling upon Luke Skywalker's up-and-coming Jedi Academy. Regardless, he eventually learns his grandfather was a Grand Jedi, Nija Halcyon, who we learned a bit about in our Jedi Trial video a little ways back. If you want to check out my playlist, it's in there. Regardless, he's part of a subgroup of the Jedi Order in the Corellian Jedi, who acted more or less independent from the standard Jedi Order. Corran realizes his only path to saving a deeply missing Mirax is to join the Jedi Temple Luke is forming, and himself becoming a Jedi on Yavin 4, since he is Force sensitive. There he has a rival, Gantoris, a Jedi who quickly learns the dark side and starts trying to kill Luke. However, after his mysterious death, the Jedi learn of Exar Kun, a Sith trapped in Yavin 4. Corran eventually confronts Exar Kun after the dormant Sith puts Luke in a coma, and to save the school he kills Kun once and for all. Though shortly before this, another promising student, Kip Duran, steals the Sun Crusher and destroyed a star system with it. Luke takes Kip under his wing, and with Corran unable to cope with this act of forgiveness given the millions that died, he meets up with Booster Tarek, his scoundrel father-in-law who indirectly had his own father killed. Booster is pissed, his daughter is missing but can't do much about it, taking Corran to Corellia to visit his grandfather, who tells him further of his Jedi heritage. Corran decides to join the crew of individuals headed by Leona Tavara, who he hopes can bring him to his wife, knowing that she had something to do with her disappearance. It all goes good until after proving his knack as a fighter pilot and causing the death of his rival in the organization, Sasuru, Tavaria grows interest in having sex with Corran as her boy toy, basically. And yes, this is a major plot point for a portion of this novel. At first he thinks a fucking sexy Imperial lady to save his wife was a means to an end, but after talking with a runaway he picked up, a Lego Sakla, he realizes that doing something like that may be an easy way to get free reign and use the Imperial's resources, but at the cost of his marriage. Instead, he starts hunting the organization as a Jedi and starts messing with the crew of the Invidious and its subordinate allies. This weakens the organization and eventually leads him to revealing himself to a cult of Force users, the Jensari, who are basically good guys who learned Sith teachings, misled into thinking those teachings were that of the heroes and that the Jedi are evil. Anyhow, he is confronted by a group of them. Before his imminent defeat, though, Luke Skywalker arrives, since a buddy of his from Rogue Squadron was the only person who knew what he was up to and told Luke where he was. Luke and Corran beat the undertrained Jensari, who Luke uses a force tampering Islamari on and causes them to spill where the base is that Mirax is being held at, since they work with the Invidious. Luke and Corran infiltrate the base along with his old wingmate Quarg, Alegos, and the group take on the Imperial Governor's castle, saving Mirax, but being confronted by the leader of the Jensari, Sari Kar, who he beats, but the Jedi manage to have her come around to their ways, which sees the Jensari become allies to the new Jedi Order. Though as this is happening, Tavaria is setting up a counteroffensive. Corran projects thoughts into her brain using Jedi powers, convincing her a super Star Destroyer commandeered by the New Republic is coming to take down her ship, so she ends up leaving the story. With the story ending, revealing that Mirax and Corran are finally having the baby they were struggling to agree upon. Corran is the star of this book, and he is having a bit of a crisis. The galaxy is at peace, or at least as peaceful as the Star Wars universe is willing to get at any given time, and Mirax wants to start a family. Problem is, one day, when returning to Coruscant, he finds that Mirax has been abducted, and with no plan to save her, he must become a Jedi Knight. Luke Skywalker knows he is Force sensitive, and encourages him to hone his skills and learn with his students at the Jedi Academy, eventually uncovering the secrets of his grandfather, who was a Jedi Knight during the time of the Great Jedi Purge. Though while this is happening, the resurgence of an ancient Sith Lord, Exar Kun, threatens to cause issues within the Jedi Order, knocking off Jedi like Gantoris, which leads to even more pressing issues for Corran. Corran leaves the temple as he learns his grandfather was a Corellian Jedi, Nija Halcyon, who we talked about in the Jedi Trial book, as I said. However, Corellian Jedi were a group of Jedi that ruled more or less solo from the wider order, but he is also mad that Luke would take on a stowaway, Kip Duron, who had recently killed 25 million people in an attack involving the Suncrusher superweapon. He and Luke eventually bury the hatchet after the duo tangle with the Jensari, led by Sarai Kar, the group of Force users that were kind of a weird middle ground between the Jedi and Sith. But after some tussling, and he telling Luke he wanted to embrace his life as a Corellian Jedi, it all works out. One moment I find particularly important on his Jedi journey is when he finds and saves Alegos Akla, since he would eventually be an important factor in his journey later on. Alegos becoming a senator and being killed in the Vong Wars, making the fighting of the Vong very personal. It kind of adds up to that story later on. I talk more about that in my Dark Tide duology videos, which is also in my Star Wars playlist linked at the end. Anyhow, Mirax and his wife want kids, but he isn't ready, and in the months Mirax is captured, he slowly learns to sort of embrace the idea, and by the time she's saved, he agrees to have kids, something I find kind of sweet. One thing to note about the new Jedi Order that was later retconned about Jedi is that they can indeed have kids and get married, hence Luke marrying Mara and having kids. This wasn't a rule that was established when this book came out. It ended up working out anyhow, since as we found out from Revenge of the Sith's novel, Yoda sort of regrets certain aspects of the Jedi Order, including the suppression of emotions, and Luke conquering those emotions sort of saved the galaxy. If he didn't believe Darth Vader was good deep down, the galaxy would never have been saved, something that Obi-Wan and Yoda had doubts about originally.
Booster Tarek is his father-in-law, who kind of hates him, but in a father-in-law type of way, and the duo makes strides in the book to kind of get more friendly despite Booster's outlaw nature and Corran being a cop that wanted to catch people like him.
Wedge Antilles is also a voice of reason for Corran and appears pretty frequently early on as a shoulder to cry on, but also as a friend and mentor to Corran. Antilles is really important to the novels, and this makes good sense since Corran started his career in the books as an X-Wing pilot as part of Rogue Squadron in that novel series, before joining the Jedi Order for the later stories and legends. Wedge and Corran interact a lot in these books. You also have the old cranky Jedi trainee, Streen, who helps Corran embrace his Jedi destiny despite Corran being combative with other Jedi trainees like Gantoris, the Jedi who ultimately falls to Exar Kun first in this novel. Streen also does a cool job describing the Force as a concept. No midichlorian power levels needed. I like Corran in this book. I also like the book being told from a first-person perspective. It really gives us an idea of the character as he embraces his Jedi training. One moment I really liked was when he picked his bunk in the Yavin base, which had become the Jedi Academy, and ends up taking the shabby barracks of Red Squadron and seeing the men who fell that day's names, which was so hopefully written next to his friends, Luke and Wedge Antilles. It's a bittersweet moment and says something about Corran and how he views death, thinking of these other pilots as important people as well as Luke did. With Luke coming in and kind of having a conversation about him and his fallen friends before they went up to fight the Death Star. One thing I didn't love about Corran is how sexy he is. Now, that sounds a bit weird, but like every female character wants to bang him, and they want to bang him despite being married, including Leona, the leader of the Invids, who kidnapped Mirax and misled the Jensari. She is evil, but a good portion of that arc is Corran considering becoming her boy toy and joining her pilot squad, Rock Squadron, to seduce her and save his wife, which kind of works when he half seduces her, but I don't know. They just keep going with it, and it just starts getting a little boring and a little bit fan fiction-y. And that was far and away the worst plotline in this book, since it felt like sexy fan fiction for the author's OC and not a genuine character arc like most of the rest of the book. But it's so deeply ingrained in like the last third of this book, and it's just a constant internal struggle for Corran. It's just really stupid. I don't understand why they went that route. In fact, I barely mentioned it in this video, despite it being essential to the plot, because it also isn't really all that essential to the arcs of the characters, and it really isn't that important when compared to the first 2/3 of this book, which kind of begs the question why this ended up being the resolution on whether or not he was going to have sex with a random lady. Luke's arc mirrors his stuff from the Jedi Academy series. He wants to train these new Jedi, including his niece Jaina and nephew Jason, but is in a way over his head, making decisions like bringing on Kip Duron despite his better judgment because he too once fell to the dark side during the Dark Empire trilogy. I like how he and Corran don't see eye to eye in this book, but eventually respect each other, and by New Jedi Order they are near best friends and the two key masters in the Jedi Order, showing how much Corran grew within the ranks of that organization later on. Exar Kun is a ghost haunting the Jedi Temple on Yavin and killing some of the students, with some of his mysteries hidden in the Great Temples. This is a secondary story here, but we get to see the Exar Kun saga through Corran's eyes, and that trilogy is only shown through part of it, and only for a portion of this novel. This is more explored in the Jedi Academy trilogy, with the book being more about saving Mirax and becoming a Jedi in Luke's New Order, then eventually breaking away that to create a new breed of Corellian Jedi. This book is kind of a remix of any great rise into Jedi knighthood. The format set up with Luke in A New Hope, and we've seen it kind of over and over again. Ezra in Rebels, Ahsoka in Clone Wars, just that general coming of age within the Jedi Order. It does interesting things with the Jedi Academy trilogy, and Corran is likable, and discovering things like the Jensari and Corellian Jedi was kind of different, since it's cool to see more shades than just Jedi and Sith, which I feel the modern continuities really boiled it down to. Like A New Hope, it really adds a lot of lore, some more important, some less important, but it's certainly unique by the standard of modern Star Wars. Overall, this is a solid novel, and most of it is very good, with layer upon layer of new lore, characters, and just fun moments with this kind of Han-Luke character hybrid learning to be this new type of Jedi, and Corran fits within the cast of the wider Star Wars series pretty well. The Grey Jedi Jensari were really fun. As I said, I liked that there were more than just Jedi and Sith, and it's also kind of weird to see these people who have all the power understand how to use it to an extent, but don't understand how to really use it like the Jedi or Sith do. Characters all around Corran also have cool moments. Luke becomes more adventurous and haphazard when he's confronted with some Islamari and loses his connection to the Force, which kind of explains the stark difference between Luke in A New Hope as a naive kid and Luke from Return of the Jedi, who's this stoic Jedi Master. Other than the mere fact that Luke knew shit was getting really real during the latter film, and Corran taking his own path. is fitting for the character and how he's portrayed up to this point in the Star Wars universe. The hugely horny plotline to save his wife was a bit of a miss for me, least if not because it really didn't add much to the character. It also makes Corran look a bit sleazy, like our hero has to work so hard not to cheat on his wife with the sexy goth mass-murdering former Imperial lady. It's also just a plot that's too long, and bro's like, what if I cheat on my wife so hard I join the dark side? And it's like, this is just, I don't know. I didn't really care for it. But Exar Kun from a lore aspect is kind of interesting, and the occasional visits to the New Order are also quite cool as you see all the different Jedi kind of mature into their roles. The book is a long 480 pages, ranking in the top 10 longest Star Wars novels, with Star by Star ranking number 1 at over 600 pages. And man, Star by Star is both good and miserable, but I'm excited to talk about that sooner or later. Though you won't feel the length too much as it breezes over so much stuff, giving everything the right time to gestate but not dwelling too much. Corran, in my opinion, is just so likable too, and for the most part, his interpersonal relationships work pretty well. All in all, pretty good book.